Welcome back to The Heat. We turn now to the case of two Chinese-American scientists accused of espionage. Last year, United States federal agents arrested Xi Xiaoxing, the chairman of Temple University's physics department. He was accused of sharing sensitive information with China, but months after his arrest, the charges were dropped. A similar case played out in Ohio starting in October 2014. Another Chinese-American scientist, Chen, was arrested by the FBI and also accused of spying for China. But charges against her were dropped shortly before her trial was due to begin last year. Ms. Chen talked with CCTV recently and described the trauma of being taken into custody.
I didn't know what was going on, what was happening. I stand there, I froze on the spot. I requested the indictment read the second time, and they did. I still didn't know what they are talking about. Then they said they're going to take me to Dayton Federal Court for a hearing. We passed through my co-workers, walked to an FBI car in front of the building. Before they get in the back seat of the car, one of the FBI put my handcuff from the back to the front. Then I saw all my co-workers are looking through the windows and watched me taken away.
Joining me now here in the studio to discuss these cases is Chen's attorney, Peter Zeidenberg. He also represented Dr. Xi. And still with us from Los Angeles is Frank Wu. He is a law professor at the University of California, Hastings College of the Law. Thanks so much, Peter. We've talked many times. This case has been in the headlines for a long time. Professor Xi thankfully has his job back. Chen not. What happened here? The cases are very similar. Was the FBI just looking for people because of the fear of Chinese espionage?
Well, I think the fact that there is so much concern, I'm tempted to say the word paranoia, but I don't want to suggest that there aren't realistic and justified concerns about spying from China, hacking from China, economic espionage from China. But those understandable and justified concerns have lent themselves to an overreaction, at least as far as I can see, certainly in these two cases where dots that should not have been connected were connected, and square pegs were forced into round holes. And despite the fact that nothing added up, nothing made sense if you stood back and you looked at the whole picture, there was no there. And yet in both cases, although the government thankfully dropped them before the cases went to trial, both these people were arrested in handcuffs. Professor Xi was arrested in front of his entire family. They had a dozen armed agents come into his house, arrested him at gunpoint in front of his wife and two daughters. Professor Chen was arrested at work under fairly dramatic circumstances that were quite similar, dragged out in front of her co-workers. So this is very traumatic experiences.
Yes, it's almost like a perp walk scenario,
exactly.
Isn't it? You know, where they parade people in front of the cameras. In Professor Xi's case, and this was very interesting, and you did a good legal job here, because he was accused of something, sharing this sensitive semiconductor information on a pocket heater, and you, the scientific community, really rallied round him, and even the co-inventor of this thing said, oh, by the way, the diagrams you have in front of you aren't of this at all, and they're very benign. That must have helped him a lot, but that also, you had to get over the suspicions of the FBI, I presume.
It was an enormous help. The fact that we could present these world-renowned physicists with their affidavits saying we've looked at the allegations, we've looked at the information that he purportedly shared, and these are not the same thing. He didn't share anything that was covered by a confidentiality agreement. And as a result, we went to the government and we said, look, talk to your own experts. Go find whoever you want to talk to. Any reputable scientist, we are convinced, will agree that Professor Xi did nothing inappropriate. And thankfully, they did take a look at that.
And now he's been reinstated, which
Yes,
is
he
great
has.
news. Sherry Chen has not. National
Correct.
Weather Service. If you read anything about this woman, she was totally impassioned with her job. Anything to do with weather or water, she was on it. We saw how emotional she is. Are you going to get her a job back?
We hope so. I can't imagine why they wouldn't. We've made a presentation. We've made a written presentation, an oral presentation. They said it was going to be weeks. It's been 6 months. We've heard nothing. So, you know, we have our fingers crossed, and we're hoping she'll get reinstated. Right now, she is being paid. She's sitting home, not doing her job. She would much prefer to be working.
Let's listen to Sherry Chen because she spoke to CCTV about her hopes of going back to work soon.
I thought I was going to be hired back immediately, but 6 months later, they sent me a letter called proposed disciplinary action, and they were trying to terminate my federal employment. I don't know, I don't understand why they are still using the same charge that has been dropped.
Frank, we're in Los Angeles. This must be heartbreaking for people who, first of all, their professional reputation is dragged through the mud, maligned with charges that turn out to be false, and then not reinstated in their jobs. What do you think's been going on with these two cases?
It's a pattern. This, it would be one thing if there were just one case, an isolated case. But you've got these two cases, you've got more prosecutions, you have the Wenho Lee case from about 15 years ago, you have the internment of Japanese Americans. So many Asian Americans are accustomed to the go back to where you came from statement being shouted at them by someone who's angry, just a stranger in a parking lot fighting for the same space, that sort of thing. So if it were just one, well, you could say, well, everyone makes mistakes, the government made a mistake. But this looks like targeting, and it looks like a pattern. There are real cases. There is real espionage. We should be concerned about that. But ruining people's lives, where they lose their job, their dignity, their freedom, the respect, and then at the end, the crazy thing about these cases is the government comes in and says, oops, we don't actually have a case. That should be an embarrassment, and somebody ought to be doing something about this.
Do you think, Peter, that Asian Americans have a target on their back because of the headlines that we've been seeing about cyber espionage between the US and China? Do you think it, in a way, is a bit like after 9/11 with terrorism and Muslims?
I'm afraid it does. It's very similar. It's a question of profiling. It doesn't mean, as I said earlier, that there shouldn't be appropriate investigations, but the government has to do their due diligence and not get ahead of themselves and understand that they can cause a great deal of harm by overreacting, and I think that's exactly what's happened here. There's been an overreaction.
Frank, what does the Asian American community, Chinese American community do about this? How do they forearm themselves?
We appeal to American principles and ideals. We have, or I thought we had, a fragile consensus. It's wrong to stereotype on the basis of race, ethnicity, ancestry, blood. We don't go up to someone and say, hey, you're black. That means you're more likely to be a criminal. That is wrong. That's illegal. It's immoral. If people stood up and said that, regardless of who they were, they would be condemned. Yet when it comes to people of Asian, and now Chinese descent, there are demagogues who openly say, well, China's a threat, you're of Chinese descent. Never mind if you've naturalized, never mind if you're native born, never mind if you speak English without an accent, if you're Christian, if you're assimilated, you're still suspect. We're perpetual foreigners whose hearts, it seems, according to some, belong elsewhere. We aren't real Americans. That's the theme here. So what do? We say, we are Americans, just like you, and we believe in the same Constitution, the same Bill of Rights, and that means equal protection and due process.
Frank and Peter, I want to ask you both this question. Do you think in both these cases and others like it that Asian Americans' success in STEM, science, technology, engineering and math somehow used against them, Peter Firth?
Well, it does in the sense that it puts them in a position with these highly significant disciplines, so pharmaceuticals, cutting-edge technology that can be dual use. You know, if you're not good in math and science, you're not working in those fields.
Exactly.
And there's such a dominance by Chinese Americans, Asian Americans, but Chinese Americans in particular, in these hard sciences in America, which, let's face it, is a tremendous asset. These people are incredibly talented, incredibly accomplished, but they are in a position where, from the government's, our government's standpoint, they have access to information which the rest of us who aren't nearly
smart.
certainly aren't as accomplished in those fields would ever be anywhere in the same neighborhood of.
Frank, do you agree with that?
Absolutely. So Asian immigrants, Asian Americans, we're playing for the American team, but we can't get others to understand that. They're suspicious. Well, maybe you're not really on this side. This is a theme. It goes all the way back to the Chinese Exclusion Act. You know, the arguments to keep Chinese and then all Asians out were not because they were thought to be inferior. The argument was they're going to take over. They're too good. They work too hard. We see that now. So your question, is the success part of the threat? Absolutely. There's a fear. It used to be a fear of Japan Inc. Now it's a fear of China ascending.